Hi everybody, my name is Stephanie. Welcome to my channel. Today I am making a cake inspired by one of the very best video games of all time, Super Mario. On this cake I have a bunch of cute little details like the mushrooms and gold coins, and on the top I have made a vicious piranha plant. I have so much I want to show you, so let's get into it. Alright, here we go. First up, I'm going to cover my board. This is actually my least favorite part, but I have to do it because it makes it look so much prettier in the end. I've colored my fondant a dark shade of red, and I'm dusting my countertop with cornstarch. I get my fondant rolled out, and then I wipe my cake drum with vegetable shortening. Next, I carefully move my fondant over onto my board. I smooth that out the best that I can, and then I cut away the excess with this little mini palette knife that I have. Using my fondant smoother, I smooth out any imperfections, and then I press my brick impression mat into the fondant. And once I've got the brick pattern on my entire surface, I pop this into the oven at 170 degrees for about 15 minutes. The oven needs to be at the lowest temperature you can get it. You can also let this air dry out overnight if you prefer that. Alright, moving on to my cakes. I've baked 2 6-inch round chocolate cakes and 2 9-inch round vanilla cakes. I'm cutting off the top of my cakes, and then I tort them, which means I'm cutting it in half horizontally. Next, I'm filling it with my American buttercream frosting. This is my kids' favorite frosting. They always like the sweet stuff. Okay, so I'm putting a layer of frosting in between each cake layer. So I'm going to end up with 3 layers of buttercream frosting and 4 layers of cake. For this one, I decided to cover it in ganache. You could use buttercream if you want, but I like how ganache leaves a super sharp edge. Either one works though. It's best to work with it when it has the consistency of peanut butter. I'm using my bench scraper to smooth out the sides, and then I add more ganache and I smooth it out again. I just keep doing this until the sides are nice and smooth. Next, I use my bench scraper to scrape away the ganache from the top edge, and I smooth it out with my offset spatula. I repeat the same process with my 9-inch vanilla cakes. I got ahead of myself here and I layered up my cake right on the fondant board, which was a mistake because I got my board all messy. Do yourself a favor and stack your cake on its own board and then move it over onto the fondant board. If you go to my Avengers cake, you can see me doing this the right way. Okay, next up is the fondant. I've already brushed my cake with food grade alcohol so that my fondant will stick to it. You could also use simple syrup or thinned out apricot jam if you want. I get my fondant rolled out and I drape it over my rolling pin and I place it onto my cake. First, I run my fingers along the top edge to make sure that it doesn't start tearing, and then I begin smoothing out my fondant with my fondant smoothers. And then I begin working on the sides. I'm just opening up those creases and smoothing them out with my palm, and then I smooth out the sides and cut away the excess. And I repeat the process for my 9-inch cake too. Okay, let's start the decorations. For my clouds, I'm using my tracing technique where I print out a picture and I trace the design onto the fondant, and then I use an X-Acto knife to cut it out. Once I've cut out a bunch of clouds, I'm outlining them with my black food coloring marker, and then I finish off the clouds by hand painting some blue streaks to match the clouds from the game. And I do the same for the green bushes. All these decorations are made of fondant with a little bit of Tylose powder mixed into it. Next, I'm using my square cutter to cut out the brick blocks. And I create the brick look by lightly running my pizza cutter across it in straight lines. And I create the smaller lines with a sugar shaper tool. I also cut out some question mark blocks and I hand painted the question mark. The coins are up next. I'm using a large piping tip to cut them out. I made a whole bunch of these, and then I used a smaller piping tip to emboss a smaller circle on each coin. And I used my sugar shaper to make the line right in the center. Each coin got painted with my edible gold paint. I wanted to add a couple of mushrooms to my cake, so I'm modeling these out of fondant with Tylose powder. I'm just using my hands and a rolling pin to help me model it. I cannot forget the eyes, which I'm drawing on with my edible marker. And I cut out some white dots that I'm attaching with edible glue. Okay, next up is the Piranha Plant. So I first started making this out of Rice Krispie treats, but it was way too heavy. I did not think it would hold, so my next plan was to use styrofoam. I'm covering the inside of the mouth with black fondant, and I'm trimming off that excess. And I get the outside covered in red fondant too. The fondant will stick right on with a little edible glue. Covering a sphere is pretty difficult. You just have to keep working out the creases. I cut off some of the excess fondant, and then I ended up cutting some more off with my scissors. Okay, once I've got it covered in fondant, I'm pushing 2 skewers into the bottom of it. Later, I ended up adding another skewer to help support it too. Then I stick the skewers into another piece of styrofoam to help me hold it up while I decorate it. Next, I'm using a stray piece of fondant to smooth out any imperfections. For my piranha's mouth, I've rolled out a log of white fondant where the ends are thin and the middle is thicker, and I attach that with edible glue. Water will not work with this type of decoration. It is a little bit too heavy for that. Next, I've cut out some white fondant polka dots, and I get those onto my piranha, and then I add the sharp fondant teeth. Alright, the next decorations are the leaves. So I made my own template for these, and I'm using it as a guide to cut them out. For the center, I'm doing the same but with a different shade of green. Once I have the leaves cut out, I'm rolling up a paper towel and I drape my leaves over it. These will need to dry out for at least a few hours. Actually, it's best to let these dry out overnight, but just plan for that if you need to. Okay, we're all done with the decorations. Next, I'm moving on to my green pipe tier. For this, I'm cutting out a black fondant circle, which will go right on top of the cake. I'm brushing a little water on the top and I'm moving that over. To make this look more like the pipe, I need a strip of fondant around the top. So I'm creating the strip with my strip cutter. I roll it up and then I unroll it on the top of my cake. And then I cut it with my X-Acto knife. I wanted to add a little shading around the pipe, so I'm using my airbrush to create a shadow around the edge. Before I can stack the cake, I need to add the dowels. These are plastic straws that I cut down to the same height as the cake. Alright, I'm stacking my pipe cake on top of my bottom cake. It's so much easier to move cakes around like this when they're really cold. Next is the fun part, adding the decorations. The decorations are all dry now, and I'm attaching them to my cake with candy melts. Just decorate to your heart's content. I like adding a lot of decorations. I'm moving on to the dowels. What I have here is a sharpened dowel, which I'm pushing down into the cake. This will keep my cake in place. What you do is push it down through the middle board while twisting. Then you use another dowel to push it all the way down into the bottom cake drum. Next, I have a larger plastic dowel, which I'm pushing into the cake. It will rest right on that middle board. So now the sharpened dowel is inside of this plastic dowel. And then I cut down my plastic dowel. And finally, I'm pushing my Piranha Plant down into the plastic dowel. You have to kind of move it around to get it to fit because it's also sharing space with the sharpened dowel. If you want it even more sturdy, you could pour some candy melts down into this plastic dowel too. My skewers are long enough to stick down into the cake. To cover the plastic dowel, I'm brushing it with edible glue, and then I wrap it with a piece of green fondant. Once I've got that covered, my final decorations go onto the cake. I'm brushing my leaves with some green candy melts and I put them into place. All finished with my Mario Piranha Plant cake. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned how to make your own Super Mario cake. If you're on social media, please go check me out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye.